Hello, this is Jack from tofluency.com. Now, today we are going to have a conversation in English, giving you an English lesson on the election, the US election, which is happening in November, just over a month. Now, what we're going to do in this video is give you some of the key terms so that you can talk about this election in English and learn some vocabulary such as left wing, right wing, polls, polling station, debates, campaigns, news cycles. And we're going to just have a discussion on this election, but more importantly, give you the vocabulary so that you can talk about it yourself. Okay, so
it's also important to note that while we are going to be talking about the election and we do have our own opinions and beliefs about the candidates involved, that we're going to try to keep those out of the conversation as much as possible.
Yeah, so it's not our opinion on who we are going to vote for or who we want to win, but it's more of a discussion about the election in general. And you can have a discussion below, so please leave some comments. So what we're going to do first, before we get into a lot of the nitty-gritty, a lot of the details about everything, is we're just going to lay out the foundation of the election and talk briefly about what it's all about. Yes. Because it can be confusing and it's different to what I'm used to from the UK. So the election is every 4 years.
Correct.
And who are we voting for in this election? Not which candidate, but what type of things are we voting for?
Which roles or positions?
Yes.
So obviously there are more elections that happen in between those 4 years, but every 4 years is when we have a presidential election. And so that's going to be one of the biggest and definitely one of the most talked about positions that is up for election this year. Also, we have senators, depending on where you live, who are up for election, House of Representatives, and then a lot of other government positions too at the state and local level.
There's a lot of research to be done if you want to know who to vote for, because the president, that's the big one. That's the one everyone talks about, and I'm sure you know it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Those are the two main candidates. There are also third party candidates.
This is true.
But in the US, it's really overtaken by the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate. And we'll talk more about those two parties later and what they more or less represent.
Sure.
But this is the big one, the presidential election. And people are saying it's the biggest election of our lifetimes.
Ooh, yeah,
but they say that every time.
I mean, yes, there is always a lot of hype. But I think that this time there is a lot of different opinions between people who are considering voting Republican and people who are considering voting Democratic or have historically voted that way. And so it's definitely an election year that feels more important.
Yes.
It feels like there's more at stake.
Yeah, more at stake, which means... Well, how would you explain that?
Oh, good question. So kind of that there's more that people are deciding on than usual.
Yeah. Or the outcome is going to be more important.
Yes.
And it's going to change. So, there are different kinds of elections. The big one, the president, but then you also have, you say depends where you live, the senators, the representatives, everyone voting for representatives, right? And these two are both, they represent Congress. Now, we're not going to go into what that all means because it is complicated. We're not probably the best at explaining this, but just know that these are people who represent everyone who lives in a certain area.
Oh, but by the way, Jack actually has had a recent refresher because he became an American citizen last year.
Last year.
And
so I know a little bit about it because on the test, I had to answer some questions.
Was the test hard?
Well, there were 100 questions, and they gave you the 100 questions ahead of time and the answers that they want to hear.
Yeah.
So if you can memorize it, it makes it a lot easier. But things like 100 senators, I think 435 representatives.
That sounds right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are also local elections. So there are also state elections. So you vote for representatives in the state and governors and treasurers. And then there are city elections too. So there are a lot of things to think about when you're voting. Now, one term that I want to bring up is party line. To vote, how would you say it? To vote by party line?
Yeah, or to vote down the party line.
Which means that if you are a Democrat, then you just vote for the Democrats no matter what position it is. And vice versa, if you're a Republican, then you might want to do that as well. But there are also a lot of independent voters who are undecided and they don't know which to vote for. And they might vote for some Republicans and some Democrats depending on the candidate, right?
Yes.
But let's just talk about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, because I want to bring up some terms to describe those two parties.
Okay.
Firstly, there are some nicknames for the parties. What are those?
Well, I can talk about the kind of mascot or animal that represents those parties.
Yeah.
So the animal that represents the Republican Party is the elephant. And the animal that represents the Democratic Party is the mule.
The mule. Yeah. And Republican is represented by the red colour. And Democratic Party, blue.
Yes.
Now, we can also talk about left wing versus right wing here, which is not always easy to explain.
It is difficult to.
But I'm sure you have the same term in your own native language too, where policies are, or parties are either left wing, right wing, or somewhere in the middle. And you have things like far left, far right, centre left, centre right, centre. But a good way to explain it is to talk about some of the important issues and what those parties represent.
True. And also another word that we often use as an adjective for describing that divide is that people who are more right-wing are conservative and people who are more left-wing are liberal.
Yeah. And that term can be a little confusing sometimes, liberal, because there's also the classic liberal who is someone a bit different than the modern liberal. But,
same for conservative.
Yes.
Yes.
So issues. Whenever there is an election, there are certain issues that come up that people want to talk about. Now, this year, the coronavirus is a big issue, but we also have other things like the economy, foreign policy, healthcare, and immigration.
Yes.
So those are 4 issues that both parties want to put their side forward. So let's just take the economy. I think one of the big differences between the two parties is that the Democratic Party, when it comes to the economy, they want to tax the rich and give that money to the poor. It's very simplistic.
Yeah, or use that taxation to fund public programs.
Yes, and welfare. And the Democratic Party like to talk about increasing taxes on certain people. The Republican Party, they talk about no or less taxes, fewer taxes, and more of a free market economy.
Yes.
Very simplistic. There's a lot of nuance and subtlety here, but that's like a good way to describe it.
Yeah. How
would you describe healthcare as well, and the differences between the two parties generally?
In healthcare? It's hard to completely summarize because we have very different opinions even among among, for example, the Democratic Party. If you're more left-wing, you are probably wanting some form of more socialized healthcare. So that would be kind of the far left by American standards. And then the center left is in support of what was called Obamacare, which made certain rules about insurance companies that everyone had to be insured, and also funded more people to get insurance in various ways. And then on the more conservative side, or right-wing side, Republican side, there's a push to repeal or take away Obamacare and have a free healthcare market, without the expansion of socialized healthcare or the kind of protections and funding from the government for insurance that came in with Obamacare.
Yeah, so this is quite a complicated topic. We have a lot of words there, things like insurance.
Yes.
And also it's important to have a good overview of what the American healthcare system is. Now, if you're from Europe, then you won't pay for healthcare in most cases when you go to the hospital, to the doctors. This is funded through taxes. Whereas in the US, you buy insurance or you get insurance through your workplace, through your employer. And then if something happens to you, you have to go through a very sometimes complicated process to make sure that the insurance company pays for the healthcare. And again, here it's very complicated in how it works, but I think Kate summarized it really well. And a good way to say it is nationalized healthcare versus privatized healthcare. And there's a big debate in America about this. But generally speaking, that nationalized healthcare is never really put forward or introduced as a policy. It doesn't really have the backing, or people don't put it forward as much. Moving on to some fun stuff now. Election season is crazy.
Is it? Because this is actually your first election season. This is the first time you're going to be able to vote in a presidential election. You've been in the United States for a past election.
Yes, that was the Trump versus Clinton election.
But because you weren't a citizen, you weren't able to vote.
No. But last time it was so interesting because no one thought that Donald Trump had a chance of winning. And little by little, it became more apparent that maybe he's going to win. But even on election night, people thought, no way, this is not going to happen.
Yes, I think a lot of people were shocked. A lot of people didn't believe the results. And a lot of people are still kind of confused.
Yeah, but it's election season again. And there are certain things that happen around this time of year. For example, I've written down some things. You have campaigns, debates, polls, the news cycle, and ads. So let's just start with debates, and we're not going to talk a lot about this. But there was a debate 2 nights ago. Do you think that this would be beneficial for people who are learning English to watch that debate?
No.
Now, I agree, because the reason is, or you can watch, I think it's a good idea to watch highlights of it, where somebody has taken certain clips, but a lot of the time they were talking over each other. A lot of the time, both Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and the moderator, the person who was interviewing them and asking the questions, they were all talking at the same time. And just as a side note, I talk about when learning English, it's a good idea to find podcasts and conversations where people don't talk over each other.
This is true. It's hard to understand. It was hard to understand for native English speakers to really kind of even hear the words.
No, it was. Yeah, just to hear the words and what they're saying. Now, something interesting. I saw somebody tweet that in the 19th century, I think it was Lincoln, their debate, what they did was one candidate spoke for 60 minutes without interruption.
Wow.
And then the next one spoke for 90. And then it was something like 40 and then 10.
Okay.
So there was no interruption. They just put their argument forward and then the other person did it. And I think over the years, it's just become more where people are interrupting all the time.
And the last debate format was 2-minute responses.
Yes.
So you only had 2 minutes to
You only have 2 minutes.
talk about these big policies about healthcare and,
Yes. Yeah.
justice.
Yeah. And so they're going to have more debates. And I think they're going to change the format.
I think that I heard on the news that the debate commission was definitely considering a change in format for the upcoming debate at the end of the month.
To mute the microphones, maybe.
Yes.
Which I never do to you.
Thank you.
So we also have polls where they ask people who they are going to vote for in certain states, certain cities, or across the US. So you'll hear things like Biden has a lead over Trump in Arizona, right? Or Trump is catching up to Biden in Florida, for example. But in 2016, those polls said Hillary was definitely going to win, and she didn't. So
Yes. And another thing that's a little bit different about American elections versus elections in other countries is that even though Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote, so if every vote is counted, how many more people was it?
3 million.
3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton. But because we have something called the Electoral College,
very confusing.
It is a little bit confusing. So states have different kind of, is
Seats.
it delegates or seats?
Delegates or seats? I can't remember.
We'll look it up and leave it in the bio. But and so even though she had won the popular vote, a lot of those votes came from urban areas.
Yes.
And more densely populated states, which had a different number of electoral votes. And so in the Electoral College, that was how she had lost the vote.
It's a good way to explain it that if you win a state, you get all of those delegates or seats. They're not seats, are they? Are they delegates? I can't remember. But anyway.
Let me see.
I think, have a look up.
I'll look.
But let's say, I think there are 52 in California. So if you win California, then you get all of those 52 votes, let's say. And then if you win Florida, then you get so many as well. But if you win Maine, is it 2 or 3? Because it's a smaller state. So what they have are things called battleground states where they can go either way. Very important states. Ohio, Florida, not California, but I remember Florida and Ohio. Kate's looking at what is the Electoral College? Electors. So these are the important states to win.
Yes.
And this was very confusing for me at first. Have you found what they are called?
Yes. I think that they are called electors.
Electors. Okay. So that is a little breakdown of that. We were talking about polls. The news cycle. The news cycle is dominated by the election.
Right now it is.
Everything about the news is, well, either coronavirus or the election. So
or also natural disasters.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This
True.
is dominated. So the news just talk about the election all the time.
Yes.
And go to what Trump said, what Biden said, what this person said. And then they bring on talking heads to analyze it. What is a talking head?
A talking head is an expert on whatever subject, but they're called a talking head because in a news program, you will often have them cut away to this person, usually from here on up, and they're just talking about the topic.
Yes, and giving their analysis on the topic.
Yeah.
We also have a lot of ads, don't we, at this time? So what I find astonishing here is that most of the ads are attack ads.
Yes.
And how would you explain an attack ad?
So an attack ad, rather than promoting the candidate that is paying for the ad or whatever group is paying for the ad, it's usually something along the lines of why the candidate that they're running against is not good, is not making the right choice.
Yeah.
So it'll, say like, so-and-so, didn't do this or did do that. And,
Yeah. In 2016, Joe Biden said this.
Yeah.
And it's the music.
Yeah.
And the colour of the ad as well.
We could say the tone.
The tone.
The tone of
Beautiful.
the ad. It's very dark and...
And at the end, they say, I am Joe Biden, and I approve this message. What is that about? Why do they have to say that at the end?
I guess so that you don't have rogue people taking out ads.
Oh, right. And it's from that candidate.
Or that the candidate's campaign approved that ad.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have the news cycle. And they also have campaigns. So what do you call it when they go and to a big crowd of people, a rally? Right?
Yeah, so we have rallies. Also, they might have something called a town hall.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, so in smaller towns, a lot of the meetings of the government are called town hall meetings. And so the town halls that election or that candidates for election go to are kind of a recreation of that, where they might go to a smaller town or city and then have kind of like a meeting where they put out their platform. So that's another great word.
A platform.
The platform is what the candidate is running on, what they're promising to do if and when they're elected.
Yeah, and so that goes back to the issues. You have a platform, you say, I'm going to do this with the economy, I'm going to do this with healthcare, etc. That's great. So we have rallies, we have town hall meetings, and then let's talk about the election itself. So
can't wait. I'm so excited. You are too. It's your first time getting to vote.
Yeah, well, and it's happening. It's soon.
Yes, very soon. I think early voting starts, even though the election is more than a month from now, just a little bit more than a month from when we make this conversation. Early voting starts in a couple weeks.
So so you have election day when you go into do you call them a polling station?
A polling station or a polling place.
Okay, so you go into a polling station, you tell them your name, you get your ballot, and then you write in your ballot, and then it goes into a machine.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how you can vote, one way. But there's also early voting. What does that mean?
I think that early voting is similar to the other ways. You don't have an assigned polling place. So if we wait to vote to election day, we have to go to a certain place. And this is more, there's different polling locations that you can go to vote. And also, there's a third option, which is one that people are talking about a lot this year, especially with the virus and with different conditions, which is the mail-in ballot. And oftentimes that's the absentee ballot, because if you're not going to be at your polling place for election day, you can request these absentee ballots to mail in.
A good example is people who are in the army and they're stationed abroad or not in their home state. So then they can still vote by mail. But then it's becoming an issue in this presidential race as well. Now, results come in. So you vote on election day, and more or less, the election is decided in most cases that night or in the early hours of the morning, right?
Yeah, so they'll say something like, we call the election.
Oh, yeah. Call the election, which
Call
means by the results that have come in so far and what we expect to happen, the election is called in this person's favour. And again, election night, it's all about the president.
It's all about the president. And also, people even have watch parties to watch the election results coming in. And they'll see as different states count the ballots, there will reach a tipping point where a certain person is going to win, even though they're still counting, and they call that state. And you can kind of see it happen. And because the United States is in different time zones, you actually have states on the West Coast calling the election later than states on the East Coast. But it's exciting in a way.
So in the UK, there's always a rush for certain cities to be first. I think it's Sunderland and Newcastle. In the UK, where they always want to be the first one to say, here are our results. Do they have that here? Do you know?
I don't think so. No. I think that what happens a lot is that in battleground states, I keep on doing air quotes, but in states where
the election.
In states where the results are very close. So battleground states, another word that people will use for them is swing states, because they could swing either way.
Yeah. So it might swing this way or swing that way. And then that also swings the election.
Imagined it more as a pendulum.
I always see it at the top. Like I don't know.
Like a little odometer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are they called swing states because also they can swing the election?
Possibly, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Which means that they decide the election. Yeah. So a lot of people focus on those, don't they?
Yeah. So when candidates are campaigning, they will often go to those states.
Yes.
More often or exclusively.
Yeah, Florida's always one of the biggest ones. And I think a good thing to do as well is to watch some of the election coverage, right? So while it's in the news cycle, and you can watch this live or on YouTube, anywhere else, just to watch some of the news coverage, not too much because it makes you go crazy.
Yes.
But watch some of it in English and just listen to some of the words they're using. And then on election night, which depending where you are, you might be able to watch live. It'd be great if then you learn the vocabulary here, and then you can understand a lot more when you're watching it. And what I'll do is I'll leave a lot of these terms in the description below, because that way you'll be able to read the terms that we use and just learn more about it. But I think we've covered quite a lot there.
Yeah.
So just in summary, we have an election. Vote for the president, for Congress, local elections. We have two main parties, the Democratic Party, Republican Party, and this is a conservative versus liberal thing. There are different issues, or the parties and candidates run tickets. Things like the economy, foreign affairs, healthcare, immigration. Election season dominated by the campaigns that they run, the ads, polls, the news cycle and ads. And then on election night, you go to your polling station, you fill out your ballot, and then results start coming in, and people are very happy the next day, very sad, or indifferent.
Yeah, that is a possibility. I think with this election, it's much more, people are much more invested in the outcome.
One thing I will say about this election, and just in general, it's very divisive.
Yes.
Which means that people are on one side or the other, and they're very strong about it.
I think particularly our current president, Donald Trump, is just, proven to to somebody that people feel strongly about one way or another.
He divides opinion with a lot of people. And also the media is played a role in it. There's a lot of division between everyone at the moment. But it's going to be interesting. Oh, one last thing I wanted to talk about. So they decide the election, but then the current president continues for 4 more months, 3?
Until January.
Until January.
Yeah.
And then what's it called when they have that big event and the new president comes into power?
That's the inauguration.
Inauguration. That's right. And that happens in Washington, D.C. And the president has to swear to uphold the Constitution. And then we have a new president.
Yeah. Or the same president again.
Or the same president again. Do they do the inauguration the second time? If they win again?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah. Obviously, we are experts in this topic. But yeah, I hope you found this useful. This might have been a bit more of a difficult lesson, but what I recommend you do is go to the description, look up those keywords and phrases, read them, and then watch this again. Because if you repeat the lesson and you've read the phrases that we've used, you'll just better understand it. And then, like we said, go to the different YouTube channels from CNN, ABC, Fox News, all the different ones, and just watch some of the election coverage and learn some new things. And also just notice the types of things that they're saying and the issues that we've discussed here. And when you're in the description, get my book, The 5-Step Plan for English Fluency. Like and share this video. Subscribe if you're new. Click on the notification bell. Okay, so thank you so much for being here, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.